Tonight, Europe is in chaos, Canada is humiliated, and the ripple effects are landing right here in America. The French government has collapsed. Again. That's right, one of the European Union's strongest players just lost its prime minister. In a brutal no-confidence vote, and now the streets of Paris are filled with protests while investors panic. At the same time, Canada's big energy gamble on Europe has completely blown up. Ottawa promised that Canadian gas would be Europe's lifeline after Russia cut supplies, but instead of signing billion-dollar contracts, Europe is looking elsewhere, to the US, to Norway, even to the Middle East. And for Canada's so-called financial genius Mark Carney, the man who built his reputation selling this deal, his credibility is in flames. So what does this mean for us? Simple. America is walking away stronger, while Europe is wobbling and Canada is left out in the cold. But the bigger question is, what happens when one of NATO's key powers falls into political freefall, right when war in Ukraine is still raging? Tonight, we're breaking it all down. The collapse in France, the humiliation in Canada, and why this story is a wake-up call for the entire Western Alliance. Welcome to USA News. I'm your host, and tonight we're digging into a story that connects 3 continents, shakes global energy markets, and raises real questions about the future of the West. Here's the timeline. In France, Prime Minister François Bayrou, handpicked by President Emmanuel Macron, was forced out after losing a brutal confidence vote in Parliament. The numbers were decisive: 194 in favor, 364 against. Boom. Government collapsed. Macron, already unpopular after years of protests, is now searching for his 5th prime minister in less than 2 years. That level of instability in Europe's second-largest economy is a nightmare scenario for Brussels. It paralyzes the EU at the exact moment when unity is supposed to be its greatest strength. Meanwhile, the fallout traveled across the Atlantic straight into Canada. For months, former central banker Mark Carney was selling Canadians on the idea that Europe, especially France and Germany, would be the big buyer of Canadian natural gas. He painted it as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to finally reduce Canada's dependence on the US market. But when France's government collapsed, the illusion collapsed with it. European leaders weren't locking in long-term deals with Ottawa. They were hedging their bets, choosing Washington and Oslo instead. So here we are, Europe destabilized, Canada embarrassed, and America suddenly in the driver's seat. Tonight, we'll break down why France's collapse is bigger than just another European crisis, how Canada miscalculated its energy gamble, and why US energy dominance is now stronger than ever. France's collapse, in Paris, the unthinkable, has happened. Again. France, one of the strongest pillars of the European Union and NATO, has been thrown into political chaos after Prime Minister François Bayrou was crushed in a devastating vote of no confidence. The numbers told the story with brutal clarity. Just 194 lawmakers stood by him, while 364 voted against. That wasn't a close call, it was a political landslide. By law, Bayrou has no choice but to resign, leaving President Emmanuel Macron scrambling to find yet another prime minister. This will be his 5th appointment in less than 2 years, a staggering turnover that would be unthinkable in most democracies. The reaction in France was immediate and explosive. Crowds poured into the streets of Paris, banging drums, waving flags, and shouting slogans that echoed anger, exhaustion, and betrayal. In Parliament, opposition lawmakers from both the far left and the far right celebrated the collapse. Normally bitter enemies, they came together for one purpose: to take down Bayrou and humiliate Macron. Outside the French Assembly, the air was electric, filled with chants demanding accountability, fresh elections, and in some cases, the resignation of Macron himself. At the heart of this collapse was Bayrou's deeply unpopular budget plan. He proposed more than $44 billion in savings, cuts that included the jaw-dropping idea of eliminating 2 of France's cherished national holidays. For a country that prizes its traditions and social protections, this was political suicide. The plan sparked outrage not only from opposition parties, but also from everyday citizens who felt their way of life was under attack. For many French workers struggling with inflation and stagnant wages, the idea of losing paid holidays was the final straw. And so, Bayrou fell. His departure marks the second time in just 9 months that a French prime minister has been ousted by parliament. Macron, once seen as the great centrist hope of Europe, now looks increasingly powerless. Each time he appoints a new leader, that leader fails. Each time he promises stability, the system delivers chaos. The French president's credibility is shrinking fast, not only at home, but also on the international stage. Make no mistake, this isn't just about one prime minister. This is about a pattern of dysfunction at the very core of the French political system. Macron's government has been weakened by years of unrest. Remember the yellow vest protests, the strikes over pension reform, the anger on the streets that never really went away. Bayrou's downfall is just the latest chapter in a long story of public fury and political paralysis. For the French people, trust in government has hit rock bottom. They see leaders arguing endlessly in parliament while ordinary citizens struggle to pay bills, buy groceries, or keep their businesses alive. They feel abandoned by elites who lecture them on responsibility while failing to deliver results. And for Macron, the political math is devastating. Every collapse of a prime minister chips away at his authority, leaving him weaker and more isolated. This matters far beyond France's borders. France is not just another European country, it's the EU's second-largest economy, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and NATO's only nuclear power in the European Union. When France is unstable, the whole world notices. And right now, instability is the only thing France is exporting. Section 2. EU Impact. When a government collapses in France, the aftershocks ripple across the entire European Union. This isn't a local issue, it's a continental crisis. France is one of the EU's anchors. Its economy, its military power, and its political influence are second only to Germany. Together, France and Germany are supposed to drive the European project forward. But when Paris is paralyzed, Brussels is stuck in neutral. Here's why it matters. The European Union is already stretched thin. Germany, the continent's economic powerhouse, is limping through an energy crisis and an increasingly fragile coalition government. Italy, perennially unstable, is struggling to hold its leadership together. Spain is facing internal battles over regional independence. And Eastern European countries, from Poland to the Baltics, are laser-focused on one thing only: defending themselves against the threat from Russia. Now add France's collapse to this mix, and what you get is a Europe consumed by uncertainty. Investors see it. Financial markets feel it. Every time a French government falls, international confidence in the EU drops. The euro weakens. Capital flees to safer havens, often to Wall Street, and Brussels grinds to a halt as leaders wait to see who will even be in charge in Paris. Decision-making slows, negotiations stall, and the sense of drift grows stronger. But the consequences go far beyond economics. Europe is in the middle of the most serious security crisis since the Cold War. The war in Ukraine has made NATO unity a matter of survival. Billions of dollars in military aid, weapons shipments, and energy contracts depend on Europe's ability to act quickly and decisively. And yet, when France, the EU's military heavyweight, falls into political chaos, NATO's credibility suffers. How can the alliance present a united front to Vladimir Putin when one of its key members is paralyzed by domestic dysfunction? It's not just about defense, it's about leadership. France has always positioned itself as a leader within the EU, whether in trade negotiations, climate talks, or global diplomacy. Now, with Macron weakened and Parliament in open revolt, that leadership role is in question. Who in Brussels can step up to fill the gap? Germany? Perhaps. But Berlin is already struggling with its own fractured coalition. Italy, too unstable. Spain, too divided. The reality is stark. Without France functioning effectively, the EU looks rudderless, and this perception of weakness matters. Russia sees it. China sees it. Even America sees it. Allies are quietly asking, can Europe be relied on, or will the United States once again be forced to carry the entire weight of Western leadership? The uncomfortable truth is that the EU, for all its talk of sovereignty and independence, still depends heavily on Washington when the chips are down. So tonight, the collapse in France is not just a French crisis, it's an EU crisis. It reveals how fragile the bloc really is under pressure. It shows that unity on paper is not the same as unity in practice, and it forces Europe's partners, especially the United States, to reckon with a hard reality. When Paris falters, Brussels stalls, and the West looks weaker to the world. Canada's energy gamble. For months, Canadians were told a story. A story sold not by fringe politicians or fringe media, but by one of the most celebrated financial minds in the country, Mark Carney. The former governor of the Bank of Canada, the former Bank of England chief, and a man many Liberals saw as the next big leader in Canadian politics. Carney pitched Canadians a vision. Europe, desperate for energy after cutting ties with Russia, would turn to Canada for salvation. Natural gas exports, Carney argued, would transform Canada into a global player. This was supposed to be the country's big moment, the chance to break free from dependence on the U.S. market and finally step onto the world stage as an energy superpower. But it was a dream built on shaky ground. Because while Carney was giving speeches about Canada's bright future, European leaders were quietly cutting deals elsewhere. They weren't waiting for Ottawa to get its act together. They were signing massive contracts with the United States, tapping into Norway's established pipelines, and locking down long-term LNG supplies from Qatar. Why? Because those countries could deliver. Canada, on the other hand, couldn't. The reality is painful. Canada has only one LNG export facility, located on the wrong coast to serve Europe efficiently. Building new terminals would take a decade or more thanks to layers of environmental regulations, lawsuits, and political infighting. In other words, while Europe needed gas immediately, Canada was promising it someday. And in geopolitics, someday doesn't cut it. So, when France's government collapsed and Europe's crisis deepened, the illusion of Canada as Europe's savior collapsed with it. Ottawa was exposed. Carney's speeches now sound hollow, even embarrassing. Europeans were never really counting on Canada. They were humoring it. Behind closed doors, they knew Canada wasn't capable of delivering at scale. They took the meetings, nodded politely, and then went right back to Washington, Houston, and Doha to sign real deals. For Canadians, this is more than just a failed energy plan. It's a national humiliation. Carney's vision wasn't just wrong, it was reckless. It gave citizens false hope that billions of dollars in new revenues were just around the corner. It encouraged the government to posture as though Canada was an equal player on the global stage, when in reality, the country had tied its own hands with indecision, regulation, and a lack of infrastructure. This matters politically, too. Carney was floated as a future prime minister, a potential savior for the Liberal Party. His credibility is now in tatters. If he couldn't even read the room on something as critical as energy and geopolitics, how could he be trusted to lead a country? And while Canadians are debating the fallout, the financial consequences are already real. Billions that could have been invested in Canadian infrastructure are flowing south to the United States. Jobs that could have been created in Alberta or British Columbia are going to Texas and Louisiana instead. The markets that Carney promised would be Canadian are already locked into long-term contracts with American suppliers. In short, Canada gambled on Europe's energy desperation and lost. Europe turned to reliable partners. The US cashed in, and Canada, once again, was left sitting on the sidelines. US advantage, while France collapses politically and Canada fumbles economically, one country is walking away stronger than ever, the United States of America. Start with energy. In just a few years, the U.S. has gone from a modest natural gas exporter to the single most important supplier of LNG to Europe. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Europe urgently needed to replace its reliance on Russian pipelines. Washington stepped in. American companies ramped up production. LNG terminals along the Gulf Coast went into overdrive, and cargo after cargo of liquefied natural gas sailed across the Atlantic. Today, U.S. gas is keeping European lights on and factories running. That's not just economics, that's geopolitics. Every shipment of U.S. LNG is a reminder to Europe that its survival is tied to American energy. And here's the kicker. Even the little Canadian gas that makes it to Europe often flows through American pipelines and American ports first. Canada doesn't have the infrastructure to reach Europe directly at scale. So when Canadian energy crosses the ocean, it often does so stamped with the American flag. Washington profits, Houston profits, and Ottawa watches from the sidelines. Now, consider defense. NATO's strength has always depended on unity. But when European governments collapse one after another, it's the U.S. that keeps the alliance intact. American taxpayers fund the lion's share of NATO's budget. American troops are stationed across Europe. American weapons are flowing into Ukraine. When France is paralyzed and Germany hesitates, it's Washington that provides the leadership, the muscle, and the money. In moments of weakness, Europe doesn't look to Brussels. It looks to Washington. The same pattern plays out in economics. Political chaos in Europe drives investors toward safety. And in today's world, safety means the US dollar and US markets. Every time Paris wobbles, every time Berlin struggles, Wall Street becomes more attractive. That means more capital flowing into American stocks, bonds, and banks. The instability of Europe literally strengthens America's financial position. There's also the matter of perception. Global rivals like Russia and China are watching these developments closely. When they see France collapse, when they see Europe paralyzed, and then they see America stepping up as the indispensable power, it reinforces Washington's global dominance. It sends a clear message. Despite political polarization at home, despite fierce debates in Congress, the United States still looks like the one steady hand on the western side of the world. This advantage isn't just material, it's psychological. Allies, even if they grumble about American dominance, know deep down that when things fall apart, Washington will lead. Adversaries, no matter how loudly they boast, know deep down that America has the capacity to project power in ways no one else can. So, in the grand story of this crisis, the scoreboard is obvious. France is paralyzed, Canada is humiliated, the EU is wobbling. But the United States? It's consolidating its role as the backbone of the West. Energy giant, military leader, financial safe haven. In a world full of collapsing pillars, America is standing tall. And that, more than anything, is the real outcome of this week's turmoil.